What in the World is Happening, a show about the emergence of Maitreya, the world teacher, and the masters of wisdom. Today, we're going to explore another aspect of the story, the Space Brothers. So today's topic is the science and spirituality of UFOs and the Space Brothers. And we're happy to have with us author Gerard Artson, who's recently written a book called Pioneers of Oneness. He's written many other books. This is his most recent. And so we get to discuss this fascinating topic with him today. My name is Tim Butskis. I'm broadcasting from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And with me, as always, my good friends Sabina Qureshi, also broadcasting from Edmonton. Hi, Sabina.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Tim. Hi, everyone.
And Cielito Pascual from Seattle. Hi, Cielito.
Hey, Tim, Sabina, and Gerard, and welcome, everyone.
And of course, we have Gerard Artson all the way from Amsterdam. Good evening, Gerard.
Hello, thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Okay, great. So before we get into the topic and Gerard's book, we're going to discuss a few of the fundamentals and the resources to give some background information, and then we'll get right to it. If you're interested in some of this material also, we do have some resources you can check out. There's a website, share-international.org. That's shareinternational.org. Also, there's some great videos on YouTube on the Share International channel, and some books and downloads on share-ecart.com. And so there's some great discussions on what's called the Ageless Wisdom Teachings. And the Ageless Wisdom Teachings are hidden teachings, esoteric teachings, meaning hidden, that have always been around and available to a few individuals or groups throughout human history. And are now, as of the turn of the century, the 20th century, have become more widely known, especially in the West, through the writings of Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Helena Roerich, and most recently, Benjamin Creme. And so we'll talk about them as well. And we'll also talk about the Constitution of Man here, just to give you some background information as we delve into this topic as well. So here on the slide, we see soul, spirit, and matter, the vehicle. So this is our essential constitution. We are all souls in incarnation, divine spark of God, if you will. And it's a merging of spirit and matter into a physical body, an astral body, and a mental body. So when we talk about some of these experiences in today's show, some of them might be working in through different layers of these bodies, the astral body or the mental body.
And one of the things that we like to talk about is the fact that although we see ourselves as the personality and the physical body, the Ageless Wisdom teaching emphasizes that it's the soul that's our true self, that's our real identity. And so part of the process of the evolution of our consciousness is for us to begin to identify more and more with ourselves as a soul in incarnation. And the writers whose work we reference in this show, in the next slide, we see these four people. Of course, there are others as well, but these are the main authors that we turn to. Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Helena Roerich, and most recently, Benjamin Creme. And you can find their writings online in bookstores. And if you go to the website that we showed earlier, you can find a lot of information that Benjamin Creme gave out, and also all of his books are there. So do go ahead. It's extremely interesting and rewarding. Seeing ourselves as a soul in incarnation means that we immediately realize that we don't just live once, but we live many, many times. The concept of reincarnation, and that brings into play the concept of karma as well. As you sow, so shall you reap. And the Ageless Wisdom teachings also tell us that in the process of evolving our consciousness, at a certain point, we will reach a type of mastery over ourselves, over all of our bodies. And those who have gone ahead of us and have already reached that point, we call them masters of wisdom. They have mastery over themselves. And one of the main topics that we bring up in our shows is how at this moment in time, with a transition between two great ages, the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, with the change of energies, there is also another law that comes into play, the law of cyclic return, meaning that there is always a teacher who comes at the time of change between ages to help humanity in that transition. And so our information is that the teacher this time is coming not only himself, but also with an entire group of his colleagues, the Masters of Wisdom, because this great teacher is one of the Masters of Wisdom. And it's an amazing event to be witness to be alive for at this time.
This is a great time, and in regards to the changing of ages, we can see in the world a lot of transition happening. It's a very difficult and challenging time. There's also great opportunities at this time. As Sabina said, there are Masters of Wisdom who are now on the physical plane in the world, and we are also in the middle of a change of two great ages. So every few thousand years or so, we get into energetic alignment with a different constellation of the zodiac. And these great cosmic energies transmit onto the planet, and they help shape our structures, political, economic, and social, and so on. And so we're stepping from the age of Pisces into Aquarius. And so all of our structures are undergoing a change in energetic support, if you will. Pisces offered us over the last few thousand years the energies of individuality so that we could move out of the herd mentality and from being unconscious sheeple to strong individuals that could, with qualities to offer. And then from Pisces, we switched to Aquarius, which is individuals with these qualities working as a group. So going from just the individual to the group, we're bringing in group energy and the idea of unity and diversity, and that we are all one. Also in Pisces, we have the energy of idealism, where we set these high standards and ideals, but Aquarius brings them into manifestation. It synthesizes and brings these ideals, for example, the ideal of human rights and right human relations, into something that we're manifesting. So you see a lot of that in the world, people fighting out in the streets for justice, racial justice, social justice, and so on. So they want to manifest these ideals, and the energies of Aquarius are supporting that. The younger generation have really got that energy focused, and they're working very well in the world right now towards change. And so we also have those that are trying to hold on to the old ways of Pisces, and trying to slow that process down as well. So this creates a lot of the tension that we see in the world right now. And so it brings in the Masters of Wisdom to help with these changes. They're fully aware of all of this, as well as the Space Brothers, because right now is a cosmic event. We have humanity's ready for it in our growth of consciousness. There's the change of ages, and it is a cosmic event. So like Sabina is saying, the Masters of Wisdom are in the physical plane for the first time in 98,000 years. They've always been around inspiring humanity, but now they're in the world along with Maitreya, the world teacher, who is the Master of Masters. And when we say masters, we don't mean masters over anybody. These are individuals who have mastered themselves and evolved out of the human family. We can consider them as loving elder brothers that demonstrate perfect love and wisdom. And they have a set of priorities, knowing all the ups and downs of humanity. They know exactly what we're going through, what energies are at work, and they do coordinate and work with the Space Brothers. Maitreya's mission, we have a quote here from him about sharing, which is key to resolving the problems that we're facing now, sharing the resources of the world on a global scale. There are lots of individuals that have these plans in place. We just need to implement them and bring the will to make this happen. And his quote is, "Without sharing, there can be no justice. Without justice, there can be no peace. Without peace, there can be no future."
Now, that's a powerful quote indeed. It sums up so much right there. And as we now move into talking with Gerard about his book, the title of his recent book is Pioneers of Oneness. And this word oneness is about unity. And so you can see that the concept of sharing is based on this idea that we are together, we're one. So we can't leave anybody out. Gerard has worked with the network of volunteers, of which we're members, for many years. We see here a picture of him translating for Benjamin Creme at a conference some time ago. And so Gerard, you have been part of this work of making known the news about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom for quite some time. And then you began to branch out into writing about our visitors from other planets, other places. How did that begin for you? What led you to that?
Yes, I remember. Yes, indeed. I've been around for a while. That photograph you just showed with me translating for Benjamin Creme was taken in 1982 during his national talk here in Amsterdam. And you have on the screen, I see the title of my first website, which I published in 2008, Our Elder Brothers Return. And that is a website where I've compiled an annotated catalog of teachings as confirmed by DK, the Master Djwhal Khul, through Alice Bailey, by Benjamin Creme's master. And of course, those are the wisdom teachings that you guys have just given the outline for. And it's actually it's not hidden anymore. They used to be hidden, and since the work of Blavatsky, they've gradually been reinstated in the modern world, available for anyone who's ready and willing to dive into them and study them and apply them to their own lives. And my interest, I've always been interested in flying saucers and contactees, but I never really had the time to do much about it. And then I learned about what everybody thought at the time was George Adamski's first book, Wisdom of the, is it Wisdom of the Masters of the Far? Yes, Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East, 1936. And I was so surprised to find that title, and it had been reprinted a few times. And that's when I started looking into his work more closely. And of course, there's his books about contacts, sightings, and contacts with flying saucers. People from the flying saucers stem from the 1950s. His first contact was documented in November 1952. And when I reread his book, Inside the Spaceships, the teachings that he received from what he called masters from other planets, the masters from Saturn and from Venus specifically, was so much in alignment with and in agreement with the teachings that we know through Benjamin Creme, Alice Bailey, and Helena Blavatsky, that I wanted to know more, and I started studying his books more. And of course, I was fortunate enough to find a copy of Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East. And I looked into some other cases of contact, specifically Giorgio Di Bitonto, an Italian contactee, and some other of the American contactees. There was a whole group of people, especially, of course, in the United States. And I say, of course, because those are the best known, especially in North America. But it happened all over the world. It happened in South America, it happened in Europe, and it happened in other parts of South Africa that I know of. Flying saucers were reported in China in 1947 when the Roswell crash happened. So it was happening all over the world. And in 2008, I believe, I published my first article about the similarities between the teachings, the Ageless Wisdom teachings as we know them, and the teachings from space through George Adamski and the other contactees. So that's really where it started for me.
I have a question, George, for our audience who's not that familiar. And I'm always stunned. I've read 3 of your books. I'm always stunned that there is information out there accessible to anyone, but little known about a contactee between Space Brothers and one of us, Earth people, over time. We think that they just, at the most they land in a farm somewhere and maybe people witness it until 5 in the morning. But you touched on it there. Can you talk about some of the more remarkable contactee experiences that occurred over a period of time and with multiple, large numbers of people?
Well, of course, the most important contact story, I believe, is that of George Adamski. And his first contact happened in the presence of 6 witnesses, even though they were at a slight distance from the actual saucer where one of the occupants stepped out and talked to Adamski, who had walked up to the spot. Later on, his contacts continued over many years, actually until his death. Several other people have been witness to those contacts as well, although the majority of the contacts were with him by himself, taken up in sources and going on motherships. But the contactee, the Italian contactee I mentioned, Giorgio Di Bitonto, he started having dreams in 1980. Eventually he figured out the dreams were telling him to go to a certain spot in the nearby forest. And at one point in time in 1980, he took 2 or 3 of his friends to check out that spot, and they were contacted there. So there was a group of people, and at first the contacts were just with people having stepped out of the spaceships and the initial acquaintance. I believe that happened a few times until the whole party was invited on board and received teachings and blessings, and the teachings were very much in line again with the Ageless Wisdom teachings. And one of the remarkable things in that case was that I believe it was on the first or one of the early meetings with these people from the spaceship were with the same people that George Adamski had described and met in 1953 on his journeys on motherships. George Adamski had rather recurring contacts with people from Venus, Mars, and Saturn. And he had given them names, not their real names, because apparently they don't use names on their planets, personal names. But when these were introduced to Giorgio Di Bitonto, he recognized them. And then he was finally introduced to someone else, who was introduced as your namesake. He was known as George when he lived on your planet. And he didn't speak himself, this being who used to live on Earth as George Adamski. But he was described as very, very friendly and quite familiar with a lot of information.
So George Adamski passed away in what year?
In 1965.
In 1965, and so he reappeared in this experience with the Italian in 1980 with his colleagues who he had been in contact with. And George Adamski, I think he was of Polish heritage, but he lived primarily in California. Is that correct?
Yes, he moved with his family to the United States at around age 4 or 5. So he lived in America his whole life, his entire life. And he moved to California around 1926, 27, 8, around that time.
Mhm. And just because again, for those who are new to this information, I've never heard about George Adamski before. Why don't we just make a distinction between the disinformation or misinformation in connection to contactees. Oftentimes we hear about UFOs and in our minds we just lump it all together as being one thing and that's happening, but there's major distinctions. What would you want the audience today to understand about the difference between Adamski's experiences and many other reported UFO contacts?
Well, we had George Adamski in America, we had Daniel Fry, Truman Bethroom, um, Orfeo Angelucci, and several others who were all contacted in the early 1950s. And very often they were contacted on more than one occasion and asked to share their story with the people through writing about it or speaking about it, which these people did. This took place in the 1950s, as I mentioned, which is when the Western nations, led by the United States, and the East Bloc, led by the Soviet Union, were engaged in a war of ideologies, the Cold War. I think it is significant, and it's the reason, partly the reason why there was such intense attempts to contact people and inform the world about the existence and presence of these brothers and sisters from space. Because we lived here on Earth under the threat of nuclear annihilation. And of course, the misguided attempts of our governments to stave off the perceived totalitarianism of the Soviet Union, and vice versa, the perceived injustice in Western nations on the part of the Soviet Union, it required huge expenses in terms of armaments and nuclear weapons that had just, of course, been invented in the 1940s. And there was an enormous buildup, and that required public consent and public support to spend that much money in order to not lose that support. It was important that that people were not lending their ears to message of peace and brotherhood that these space brothers and sisters were bringing through the contactees. So they were, all kinds of misinformation was let loose on these people. Of course, we had the Roswell incident, the crash in Roswell, according to Benjamin Graham, that was a sacrifice on the part of the Space Brothers to give our military and scientists some materials to research and investigate, and tell them, let them know, we're real, we're here. There were even some bodies involved of extraterrestrial occupants of the saucers, and that was all covered up. I just read about a new 3-part documentary series on the History Channel upcoming about this Roswell crash, and so that was all covered up. And then these contactees started coming out with their stories about having been contacted by people from other planets. And there was a fair amount of interest among people, because we were living in fear. Humanity was living in fear of nuclear destruction, and if not nuclear destruction, occupation by the Reds. So governments needed the continued support of the public. And I believe that was one of the reasons why a lot of misinformation and later disinformation was let loose to confuse the whole field and to scare people about the aliens. So that is where I believe the story and the information of the contactees was deliberately fudged, not fudged, but muddled up and ridiculed and denounced. And of course, our science wasn't really helping, because our first space probes were sending in data about the surface of Mars or Venus, and there were no signs of life there, which of course is understandable if you know that life is universal and doesn't really depend on a carbon based dense physical body.
Right. So in fact, when you talk about that, not depending on a dense physical carbon body, that leads into what we want to talk about next, the different planes of matter, because what you're essentially saying is that although on the perspective of the solid physical plane of matter, nothing is visible, for example, on the surface of Mars or Venus, there in fact is life there. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, according to the teachings, life is universal. It's not an accident in the backwaters of the Milky Way that we have life here, what we call life, in dense physical manifestation. People walking the face of the earth, birds flying in the sky, and fish swimming in the sea. But life is really the essence of the universe. That's where it begins. And it manifests on many, many different levels. According to the teachings, the Milky Way is a living being. The solar system is a living being, and the planet Earth, each of the planets are living beings. So life sort of descends involves itself into matter of one vibration or another, and on our planet it has involved itself on the densest level of physicality, as the teachings tell us, and as our experience tells us. And on other planets, it may have not gone lower than, for instance, the etheric planes of matter, or it has evolved back up to the etheric planes of matter if it was on the dense physical planes maybe thousands or millions of years ago. So it's a matter of life manifesting itself through the planes, cosmic planes that we cannot know anything about, just because our awareness, our consciousness has not evolved to that point yet. And the interesting thing is, what I find in my research now is that science, just mainstream science, is going in the same direction, is coming closer to acknowledging the fact that there must be more to life than what we can actually observe and see in empirical terms. Astrophysics has been saying for many years now that 96% of the universe, they can't pinpoint it. They know, based on the calculations of the mass of the universe, they know there must be a lot more mass than we can see through all kinds of astronomical and astrophysical observations. Not even just through telescopes and probes, but through infrared cameras and telescopes and things like that. So there must be much more to the universe than we at our level can observe.
So are you saying essentially that there is more in the universe than we right now are capable of perceiving? Like our
Yes.
instruments, our measurements just don't perceive it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The universe is a living being. Space is a living being. If you look at if you look at beyond mainstream science and what is called as what is called post-materialist science, which is gaining a lot of traction these days, it recognizes that matter is not the basic building block of the universe. Matter actually doesn't exist according to post-materialist science, and even quite a few mainstream scientists, you know, Max Planck and other famous scientists have concluded, even though they can't prove it, that matter is not as solid as we experience it. And in post-materialist science, the general idea now is that consciousness lies at the foundation of matter and our experience of the physical world. So that's where we come very close to the wisdom teachings, which says that there's this absolute, you know, religious people would call it God. The space people often refer to it as the infinite Father, that projects an idea into space with a masculine and a feminine energy, which at one point meet, and creation takes place. And of course, this takes, I don't know how long, billions of years. The universe, or the Milky Way, I believe. No, our universe, according to astrophysics, is 4.7 billion years old, I believe. The Big Bang was happened 4.7 billion years ago. So it takes ages from our perspective. But these cycles of creation and evolution have brought forth this enormous, you know, I don't know if you've ever looked at the recent photographs from the Hubble telescope. They are so beautiful. They are so evocative in terms of, you know, the different lights and the shapes that we continue to find throughout the universe and beyond our own. Well, I can't say beyond our own universe, but it is so unbelievably large that it would be arrogant of us to say life, you know, if we can see it, then it's life, and if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. And unfortunately, more and more scientists are coming to that conclusion. And the interesting thing that I have documented in my new book especially is that you know, the forefront of science nowadays is coming closer and closer to the postulates of the wisdom teachings that were first reintroduced to the world by Madame Blavatsky. I juxtapose various quotations from Blavatsky's work with quotations from scientists such as Hungarian professor Erwin Laszlo, and German professor Harald Wallach, who made an extensive study recently about the nature of reality. And their conclusion is that reality really is oneness. Everything is one. It's so, you know, we often say it's so easy, we're all one, you know, and that's why we need to share. But it's an actual fact, and science is now on the verge of proving it, with many scientists, you know, in theory, having come to that conclusion, and we're getting closer and closer to being able to prove it,
Gerard,
at least mathematically.
I'm curious, you know, physics has been around for as long as it's been around, and yet what do you think is changing today that more and more scientists are supporting this idea, which is still a hypothesis? They're delving into it, that consciousness is more fundamental than matter. What do you think the change has been?
Well, the change, I think, is twofold. On the one hand, of course, we have the new energies coming in from Aquarius, as you pointed out at the beginning of your presentation, which imbues the whole planet with new ideas and changes our view of life, even if we're not aware of it. And people who are open to it, like many scientists and people active in other fields, are beginning to be more open to looking in different directions. And that's what I've tried to document in my book. And of course, systems science, on the other hand, is actually perhaps an early result of those new energies. It was first proposed in the 1950s also. So we had the contactees in the 1950s. We had the Cold War in the 1950s, trying to denounce and ridicule the contactees. But the system science was also first proposed and set up in a way in the 1950s as a interdisciplinary way of looking at findings from different scientific disciplines, different scientific avenues, including quantum theory, for instance. So even though, you know, for many it may still be a theory, based on what we know at the quantum level of existence, it is very much considered reality that, you know, we're all interconnected. Everything is interconnected, not just us people as one human race on this planet, but actual literal oneness, interconnectedness, and thereby interdependentness.
Let's bring it back to, oh, go ahead, Sabine.
Well, it was this, what you were saying was reminding me of one of the things that Benjamin Creme has said about how every atom is interconnected with every other atom in the universe. And the first time I heard that, on an intuitive level, it makes sense. But then when my mind tries to think about it and understand it, I get stuck. I can't figure out how that can possibly be true. But yeah.
Yes, and I've struggled with that myself. But the more you go into it and study all the different approaches that come to the same conclusion, the more of a reality it becomes.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I noticed reading your book was the description of how it's consciousness, through consciousness, it goes in a different, I don't know if direction is the right word or plane, but that that the connection between everything is that you can access that through consciousness. So it's like a different dimension or a different axis or something through which to discover that. And that seemed to be also what, for example, this scientist Ervin Laszlo was talking about when he describes consciousness as being fundamental. And so that's also fascinating to think about in terms of when and how will our scientists be able to perceive consciousness in a way that they would consider an objective fact or something that they can prove somehow.
Well, maybe shy of proving, many are already there. They are already accepting and working on the premise that consciousness is at the basis of our lives, of our reality. And understanding life, and I think this is crucial, understanding life, when we realize that understanding life is really a matter of understanding the expansion of our awareness of life, then we can see that it is the evolution of consciousness that life is all about. And as consciousness first involves itself and then evolves, and in the case of the human kingdom evolves into the next kingdom in nature, the spiritual kingdom, the hierarchy of masters, and beyond, then we're beginning to see things more in a cyclical manner. We see cycles of involution and evolution, and that that brings us closer to an understanding of how everything is connected and one. And the quote you just had up from Ervin Laszlo, the striking thing is that in what was really his first book, The Invisible Ocean, George Adamski wrote in exactly the same terms in 1932. So before his acknowledged space contacts, he was teaching about consciousness, and we're actually living. We don't see it. Benjamin Graham, you just quoted him, Sabrina, but Benjamin Graham has also said we live in an energetic universe. And that is also very much accepted scientific postulate. We live in an energetic universe, and this energy, that's really again a manifestation of this consciousness. So and George Adamski he's quite brilliant, if you ask me, in terms of explaining rather intricate, complex matters in the simplest terms. And he compared the reality of life to an invisible ocean where the different strata of pressure allows for different manifestations of life. So he says at the bottom of the ocean, the fish are used to the high pressure, and they can't really go up very much. And so they can't see what's beyond their particular stratum of pressure. So he was really way ahead of his time, and teaching about consciousness. I believe
that's a great metaphor. I want to bring it back to the activity of the UFOs and the Space Brothers. We've been talking about consciousness and how scientists are more and more recognizing the fundamental aspect of consciousness, more primary than matter. So let's connect it back to UFO activity. We're seeing, it seems to be, increased activity of UFOs. You've been talking about these extensive communications from Space Brothers with Earth-based people. We're talking about the different levels of the etheric planes, and how life manifests on these different levels, and one level may not be aware of the other level. So what are the Space Brothers telling the contactees? What's been the common message?
The common thread in their message is humanity is one, and we need to manifest that oneness in a brotherly approach to living together, sharing this planet, and making sure that we don't destroy the planet. That was, the main point of their communications. I've delved a bit deeper, and I've also come to find, in the case of several contactees, George Adamski, Giorgio Di Bitonto, also a very little known Finnish-American contactee, Margit Mustapa. Is that her name? Yeah.
Mustapa,
yes.
I think. Yeah.
Mustapa, and a French contactee who is not known in the English-speaking world, Pierre Monet. They, in so many words, sometimes not in so many words, were given the notion that they are here, the Space Brothers are here, because this is a particularly significant time in human history, the time between of transition between those two ages, and the return of a teacher for the new age. As you explained in the beginning of the program, every age is inaugurated by a member of the spiritual kingdom and the teacher for that particular age. And
So they're very aware
this
of
time
what-
is no different. And one of the reasons for their presence here is to support the emergence of the new teacher. And this is also, of course, what Benjamin Graham has said about their presence.
And so they are very aware of what's happening here. And why should they be aware and concerned? What's their connection to Earth?
Well, the idea is oneness. The solar system is one. We are only one planet, and not a very advanced planet in the solar system. And they want to make sure that without forcing themselves on us or forcing us to do anything that we do not willingly want to do, but they're trying to help us realize that we are one, and to act on that realization, to manifest that oneness, so that we can take the next step as a planet and as a human race, and rejoin our brothers and sisters on the other planets, and help in that sense the evolution of the solar system. Even though that sounds grandiose, but we have to face the facts. It's one. We're one solar system. We are one planet, and yes, humanity could decide through its separatism and its competition and its strive to destroy itself. But the space brothers and sisters will not allow us, and the beings ensouling the planets and the solar system will not allow us to destroy the planet, because that would upset the balance in the solar system.
That's extremely reassuring.
Yeah.
Well, even if we somehow manage to destroy ourselves, and we're well on our way to doing that, with the destruction of the natural world on this planet, we are setting back, even if the planet remains intact, we are setting back the evolution of humanity on this planet by millions of years, perhaps. So it's still not a good thing to happen.
No.
But the fact that the teacher is here, Maitreya, the world teacher, is in the world since 1977. 14 of the Masters of Wisdom are in the world. The Space Brothers are here, have always been here, of course, but increasingly so since the 1950s. That should give us reason for hope, and inspire us to do the best we can to bring around enough people to
make these
cooperate
changes.
and instigate the need, or make enough people aware of the need to share the national resources, the food, the technological know-how, etc., so that we can take the next step, inspired and supported by our elder brothers, the Masters of Wisdom, and the Space Brothers and Sisters.
Yeah, Gerard, there's a question from an audience member. At what level of our evolution or our consciousness can we develop etheric vision? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Do you know?
Well, I can't give a exact answer. Of course, I'm not a Master of Wisdom. I'm not in contact with the Master of Wisdom, as far as I'm aware. But I do remember what the Master DK and Benjamin Graham have said about that in general terms, and that is that it's not so much to do with a particular level of evolution, point in evolution, but more to do with your own particular makeup. You may be born in a body that is particularly sensitive to one or other of the etheric planes of matter, and that would give you etheric vision, even if you're not really very far advanced. So it's not necessarily a sign of enormous progress if you have etheric vision.
So it's more a
More
question of
a matter of
sensitivity.
sensitivity.
Yeah.
Interesting. Gerard, this is just absolutely fascinating. I want to bring it to some recent news, major news in terms of UFOs. Across newswires, it was reported that former director of the Israeli Space Agency, his name is Haim Eshed, is speaking openly about UFOs and their interaction with governments. Can you comment on that?
It reminded me very much of a statement made by the former deputy director of the Bulgarian Space Research Center, Lazar Filipov, in 2009, who also made the news, big headlines at the time, saying that in the terms of the media at the time, the aliens are here and they're watching us all the time, and they won't contact us directly because we're not evolved far enough. And I found the statements from Haim Eshed very similar to those statements. I read some of the articles reporting on the statements made by this head of the security space security
Space agency.
Yes. And some of the information there, I believe, it's either warped by the journalist or partly tainted by disinformation. But the essence, and that's really also how I work, how I do my research. You have to look for the similarities. Don't focus on the details, because the details will differ depending on people's understanding or people's access to information or people's access to disinformation that they're not aware of, that it's disinformation. So if you focus on the similarities in all the different sources, then a very interesting picture emerges, which I think, it's just another confirmation, this latest headline, of something that's been known for a long time. I've put out a video in 2015, a video compilation of 13 officials and dignitaries over the decades stating positively that the extraterrestrials are here and that there is contact, and so many scientists and militaries and government officials know about it.
Do you think there's any reason?
It's really not news. That's the fun thing, it's really not news. It's just, and the problem is really with the media not making the connection between one statement now 11 years ago and this statement. They see everything in isolation, and that's what I try to break through in my new book, bring it together, synthesize the information that we do have, and a completely new picture, huge picture emerges of life and reality.
Do you think, we're talking to Gerard Artson, he's the author of Pioneers of Oneness, the Science and Spirituality of UFOs and the Space Brothers. And we hope you'll join us again next week. Gerard, will you be able to do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, even if we have all this information, even if even if the information is coming out in its purest, most undistorted form, even if lots of people are talking about it, including high officials, do you see the possibility, or how do you see the possibility of this message actually registering, becoming a reality, like taking hold? What do you think needs to happen for this message of oneness to actually take a hold in the world?
Well, of course, obviously, the only way this will happen is by Maitreya, the world teacher, stepping forward and acknowledging, well, first of all, declaring who he is and what his mission is. And when that happens, as I'm sure you've discussed before on the program, on the day of declaration, he will telepathically overshadow all of humanity, to bring his message, to individually, through telepathy, speak to every single one of us, and at the same time his energy of love, of which he is the embodiment on our planet, will stream out in such potency that Benjamin Graham has said it will feel as if he embraces us physically. That will be the time, the moment when, for most people, the coin will drop, and the realization will come. Wait, this is real, and now I have to do something. And Benjamin Graham has also said that Maitreya and the masters will confirm the reality of the brothers and sisters from space and their presence on Earth, and their unrelenting work on behalf of humanity in keeping the planet intact. I think that is the only thing that will confirm it for people and make it a reality, at least for a critical mass of humanity. And yeah, when will that happen? It depends on, I suppose, humanity being desperate enough to be open to his message of oneness and love and brotherhood, justice and freedom for everyone. Because oneness, if we don't, we can meditate and feel one with the universe, but if we don't do anything about it, if we then go into a road rage because somebody cuts us in traffic, doesn't mean that you can never, we would never get mad again. But we have to make sure that our systems, our structures, political, economic, educational, reflect that awareness of oneness. Unless we work for that, unless we advocate that we manifest this oneness in terms of unity, express our awareness experience to some degree of oneness in unity, to ensure that everybody on this planet has enough to eat, has a safe shelter and education and healthcare, it doesn't mean anything.
Well, and Gerard, when you say that, I'm thinking of the people who are on the streets in growing numbers calling for this type of oneness, for transparency, for justice. And one of the quotes in your book that I really liked was the mention that unity is not the same thing as uniformity, because very often when people hear the word unity, they fear some type of imposition of a uniform way of thinking or being, but really that's not the case. And when you look at these large numbers of people on the streets in many countries around the world calling for transparency, for a fair distribution of resources, you see an infinite variety of people, of types of people, but they're all calling for the same thing, each in their own way. And that to me seems like a very good way to relate to unity, and the fact that we have to call for it to be made real in our structures. As you say, that's the only way.
Very much so, yes. Unity is the national order, as science agrees with the Ageless Wisdom teachings, and the contactees tell us. And even if you look at the central tenets in religion, you'll find that notion of unity. Uniformity goes against the national order, because the national order has the richest possible diversity in the human kingdom, in the vegetable kingdom, every imaginable kingdom. So even among star systems, there's not two identical galaxies photographed yet. There's only diversity. So we have to make that distinction. Unity, yes, because that is literally the state of reality, the reality of life. Except we are not expressing it, we're not manifesting it in our structures in the world at the moment. But striving to do that doesn't mean uniformity, because every country will have its own way of implementing the principles of freedom and justice, and that is how it should be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, I think maybe this is the moment to move to our next section, which is the meditation.
I wanted
And-
to ask really quickly, Gerard, you mentioned a video. Is that found on your website?
It is on my website, but you have to scroll back to some posts.
Maybe
and
our tech guru.
it should be on YouTube and on Vimeo.
Okay.
Right? On Vimeo, it's called "Let's End the UFO ET Disclosure Nonsense."
Great. So hopefully our tech guru behind the scenes can find that really quick and post it in the Zoom chat and the Facebook chat if our listeners are curious about that, or they can search for it themselves. But thank you so much for all your work, Gerard, and we look forward to continuing this really, really fascinating conversation. I can tell our audience on Facebook and Zoom, they're all in rapt attention, and because our numbers are holding and they're high. So really appreciate you being able to interpret a lot of complex information and correlate it with some fundamental teachings from the Ageless Wisdom.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'll be very happy to join you again next week.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.